So the CSS folder basically contains some HTML documents. All right. So if you click on the adding CSS.html, that will actually give you some of these structures. So we decided to add some of these HTML codes so that we can just focus on the CSS implementation itself. All right. So I will include this CSS folder as a GitHub link, so that you can as well clone this folder and work alongside us. All right. So in our discussion of CSS, like I said, we are going to be looking at some basic roadmap, okay, so that we'll be able to properly understand how to make use of CSS. So the first thing we are going to be looking at will be the selectors. All right, how we can select HTML elements. All right. So the selectors has the basic selectors. We have the ID selector, we have the class selector, we have the element selector, we have the universal style selector, which is the star selector. We also have the pseudo classes. All right, so these are the basic. So once we are done, we will move on to the complex, all right, using the CSS combinator method, all right, to select HTML elements. So the purpose of selecting HTML elements is what? To style them up, okay? So then we'll look at what the box model, how we can use the CSS box model in order to add spacing to our elements. All right, so we have the padding, the margin, and the border. All right, so those comprises of the CSS box model. All right, we'll also look at typography. Okay, so how we can actually edit our text to make it look more better, actually make it look more pretty. All right, so all of these CSS series are what we'll be looking at. All right, so we also look at positioning, unit, and display. All right, so we talk about how we can use the CSS units. So apart from using the pixel, we also have other major types which are categorized under the absolute unit, the relative unit, and the viewport unit. All right, so we are going to talk about how all of these units can be used in what way, all right, to create a more responsive design. Okay, so we also look at the positioning, we also look at the CSS display, changing an inline HTML element to a block element, changing a block element to an inline element. All right, so also look at the layout, all right, which is the flex and grid, which are still under the CSS display. How we can align our items, all right, by creating different layouts based on the type of website we are trying to build. Okay, so we also look at shadows, colors, gradients, how we can use the transforms and transitions, how we can also animate by changing the style of an element over time. All right, so we also look at media queries. The CSS media queries actually helps us in creating responsive designs. All right, so that is what the CSS media query is used for. All right, so we are going to look at how we can define some certain breakpoints, okay, in our CSS. Okay, so then lastly we'll talk about the CSS variables, how we can store reusable values, okay, reusable values in a variable, all right, which kind of makes it way more easier to customize your page, all right, using the same color theme or using the same particular size of a text. All right, so these are all what we'll be looking at in our CSS series.